White suffragists downplayed the suffrage work of Ida Wells-Barnett because she refused to choose sex over race. My name is Qiana Dukek, and I am a junior at St. Catherine University. And today I will be uplifting Ida Wells-Barnett, and she lived from 1862 to 1931. So then, today I want to talk about how the activism of Ida Wells-Barnett has been diluted by the lens of history. And in this time that we have together, I'll first give evidence of how Wells is typically identified. I'll secondly give an outline of her suffrage activism. Third, I'll explain why her suffrage work has been so diluted. And then lastly, I'll explain why this diluted view is so problematic. So then, if you do just a typical Google search, just searching up Ida Wells Barnett's name, you'll see that she's defined as an American journalist, a investigative journalist, a researcher, a civil rights activist and leader, an activist just on its own, one of the founders of the NAACP, and a skilled writer. But nowhere does it say that she's a suffragist, even though she was actively involved in the suffrage movement. So let's talk about some of her suffrage work. The common things that she's known for, there's two. There's her founding of the Alpha Suffrage Club in 1913, and then there's her involvement in the 1913 suffrage parade in Washington, D.C., organized by Alice Paul. And at this parade, she really fought against the racist prejudices of white suffragists. They wanted her and the black women with her to march segregated at the back, because they didn't want to upset white Southern suffragists and lose their involvement in the parade. But she did more than just these two things. She used her journalistic skills to get the Alpha Suffrage Club and intersectionality regarding women's suffrage in the press. She sent multiple notices to the Chicago Defender about meeting dates of the club, and that brought it regular publicity. And she put an article in the Original Rights magazine that explained how enfranchisement was so instrumental in the fight for racial justice. And she also had a newsletter for the Alpha Suffrage Club set up, and it published promotional notices and meeting briefs. Additionally, she participated in the 1894 Women's Republican Campaign Committee. She was in the Illinois Women's Suffrage Association, and she participated in speaking engagements on behalf of the Women's State Central Committee. So, if she's done all this suffrage work, then why has the title of suffragist not been given to her? Why has her suffrage work been seemingly omitted from common knowledge in general history? Lisa Tetrault, in her book, The Myth of Seneca Falls, talks about how famous white suffragists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony essentially wrote suffrage history. And this history they created was written in a way that pushed their own narratives, agendas, and ideologies at the cost of others' liberties and image. And a common argument of many white suffragists, and particularly of these two, was that race was somehow a liability to the movement, that if race was involved, that it would somehow hinder women's suffrage progress. And Stanton and Anthony even blatantly stated that uneducated Negroes shouldn't get suffrage before women. And so because of these ideologies, these two suffragists and many other white suffragists didn't want black women embracing their intersectional identities. They wanted them to choose sex or race. And when they didn't, these white suffragists chose for them. Sojourner Truth, as told by both Tetrault and Roseanne Madzuik and Susan Poland Fitch in their work called The Rhetorical Construction of Sojourner Truth, portrayed Sojourner Truth as choosing sex over race, even though she didn't. She embraced both, the intersectionality of it, just like Ida Wells Barnett did. And since Wells refused to choose, These white suffragists chose for her. They labeled her as an anti-lynching activist, a journalist, as a journalist, anything but the title of suffragist. And so today we just looked at how Ida Wells-Barnett is typically defined, an outline of her suffrage work, and why her suffrage work has been diluted by the lens of history. We've seen that suffrage activism of Ida Wells-Barnett has been diluted by the lens of history, but why is this problematic? Well, it gives a one-dimensional view of Wells, and it doesn't honor her work as a suffragist. It also is just yet another example of how in the past educated middle to upper class white people have been picking and choosing how they want history to be presented. They've acted as the curators of history so that they can create a history that follows their rules. As Tetrault said, stories are not found, they're made. We have to critically look at American histories, including suffrage histories, and challenge these one-sided, one-dimensional stories that are presented to us. If we don't, people like Ida Wells-Barnett aren't going to be honored for the hard work they did and the freedoms, liberties, and ideologies they fought for. But now, because I've been able to share all of this with you today, we now know that Ida Wells-Barnett is not just an anti-lynching activist or a journalist, but she is also a suffragist.